Hi.
Hello. Ray is now discussing an Awake magazine from 1990, his reaction to what they've just done and habitually do in the way of exhibiting not just biblical exegetical fallacies, but logical and even moral fallacies. The way they do argumentation is hypocritically the opposite of what they recommend in their public pronouncements. Here's one of their public pronouncements. An article in Awake magazine, May 22nd, 1990, on 5 common fallacies used in argumentation, lists the first as, quote, attacking the person, unquote. On pages 12 and 13, it says that this type of fallacy attempts to disprove or discredit a perfectly valid argument or statement by making an irrelevant attack on the person presenting it. How easy it is to label someone stupid, crazy, or uninformed when he or she says something we don't want to hear. A similar tactic is to attack the person with a subtle dose of innuendo. But while personal attacks, subtle and not so subtle, may intimidate and even persuade, never do they disprove what has been said. So be alert to this fallacy. End of quote.
That fallacious tactic is precisely what the Watchtower writer used in the portion just quoted from the book of Revelation. Indeed, how easy it is to label someone as critical of the way Jehovah is having his work done, and as appealing to a self-sparing spirit, as not being humble and preferring to split off and take it easy, if the person presents scriptural evidence contrary to the society's claims. It is far easier to make use of labels, and I can never say this word,
innuendo,
than it is to answer the scriptural arguments, which are the true issue. That this disdainful view is false can be seen by another earlier example that led to discussion by the governing body. It dealt with the means primarily used to ensure the witnesses regularly spend a portion of their time in distributing the organization's publications from door to door.
Back in 1971, an organizational handbook was being developed, titled Organization for Kingdom Preaching and Disciple Making. The project was under the direction of Karl Adams, then the overseer of the International Headquarters Writing Department. Unquestionably, in that period, he ranked next to Franz in the worldwide organization in being entrusted by President Knorr with responsibility as to what the content of the organization's publications should be. It is true that Franz was, in effect, the only source of new light, and except in rare cases of a veto by President Knorr, he was the ultimate arbiter on scriptural questions. Nonetheless, on a day-to-day basis, and with regard to the bulk of things published, Nathan Knorr actually relied more on Karl Adams than on Franz. He placed great trust in Karl's judgment, and Karl was unquestionably a more practical person than the vice president, that is Franz. Karl's assignments came not from the governing body, but directly from President Knorr. Knorr himself assigned those who were to write primary articles called study articles for the Watchtower. All other writing assignments for the men, aside from Franz, in the headquarters writing department at that time, came through and generally originated with Karl Adams. Although Karl was not a governing body member, nor did he profess to be one of the anointed. In the project mentioned, he selected and assigned Ed Dunlap and me, Ray Franz, then a governing body member, to work with him in writing the organizational handbook, each of us writing approximately 1/3 of the material. It may be worth noting that all 3 of us were consistently active in the organization's program of field service and meeting attendance. So I think the reason Ray points that out is they were active Jehovah's Witnesses, and for that reason they got assignments. But this this is a new fact to me that I had forgotten, even though I read this book 20 years ago. Karl Adams, in effect, is the third most powerful man in the organization. His name has to be on everything published, along with that name Knorr
Or okayed,
and
right?
Fred Franz.
Yeah.
And he's assigning even Ray Franz, who's a governing body member, to his assignment.
Yeah. And he's
Right.
not a governing board member, and he's not claiming to be of the anointed.
Well, this is, I think, pretty shocking. And when I heard about this kind of stuff when I was a witness, that so-and-so and so-and-so are not anointed, but I didn't think they had this much importance.
Yeah. To be one of the prime people for the distribution of their food. And
Yeah.
even what the food's going to be.
I remember in the 90s, back in the 70s this would be, hearing some brothers give talks. One of them was Maxwell Friend. And I thought, this guy gives the best talks of anyone I've ever heard in the organization. And then I heard he was not one of the governing body. I don't know if he was one of the anointed. I think he would have been. But anyway, he was a wonderful public speaker. But that's irrelevant, really. His credentials here, as you can see from Ray's reaction, the credentials of anybody who gets assignments in the organization
Is their own ability.
is their ability. Not theology. It's not the theology of the anointed. Just as we saw in the previous chapter about the writing department and how the assignments in the writing department were usually carried out not by anointed men. But now the assigning of those assignments is not being made by an anointed man. This is disturbing. And in the footnote, if you look up the footnote on page 187 of In Search of Christian Freedom, Ray also mentions that in court case back in the 1950s, it had already been admitted by Fred Franz in testifying at this trial that the board members of the Watchtower back in the 50s didn't get consulted when it came to this this type of material, or let's say changes in doctrinal issues, were really the province of Nathan Knorr and Fred Franz. And now we hear from Ray Franz, his personal testimony, that in the 90s it wasn't working the way it was supposed to. In the next segment, Ray takes up again what happened as the project of publishing this book, Organization for Kingdom Preaching and Disciple Making, which would set the policy for the next decade or so of what the Watchtower expected of publishers, the priorities that would be established. What happened even during the writing and publishing of that book, and how Karl Adams, this unanointed third person in the hierarchy of Watchtower publications, essentially had his advice partly followed and then ignored. And the relevance of this to policies the Watchtower has really held ever since, certainly since the disfellowshipping of Ray Franz and the other dissidents at headquarters. The Watchtower has gone back to priorities that were established before the publication of the Organization for Kingdom Preaching and Disciple Making book. And that's in the next segment.